Building components is not that easy. We need a solution, and that's where Storybook comes in. Storybook is an open source tool used for building, documenting, and testing components in isolation. By isolation, I don't mean like writing code alone in your dark room with a hoodie like Mr. Robot or something. By isolation, I mean that Storybook provides a dedicated environment where you can build and showcase components that allows developers and non-developers to view and interact with it without any need for a complete application.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you. Today we are going to talk about design system, Storybook, and of course React Native. So first of all, I have to make some introduction. My name is Federica and I'm going to talk about what design systems are, why they're useful, and our job as engineering team in order to better develop this type of project. And Anna's here will talk about Storybook and how to use it inside React Native apps. So if you missed something, don't worry. At the end of the talk, we are going to give you the slides and the GitHub repo that has the code that we are using inside. So we are both front-end engineers from Belka. Belka is a digital product studio. We design and build successful digital product for high-growth tech companies. You may know some of them. We are specialized in the UX research, product design, and React Native development. So we developed the Spiagge app that allows you to book your spot at the Lido. We also collaborate with Factoring Cloud, the biggest electronic billing service in Italy. And then we helped Indigo AI with their onboarding that uses, guess what, AI. So, before we start, I need to ask you a question. So, how many of you know what a design system is? Just raise your hand. Okay, so if you didn't raise your hand, don't worry, I'm going to give you a detailed explanation. So let's start with this definition from the Nielsen-Norman Group, authorities in the design field. So they say that a design system is a set of standards to manage design at scale by reducing redundancy while creating a shared language and visual consistency across different pages and channels. So did you understand anything? Because I didn't. So let's highlight some keywords from this wall of text in order to better define what a design system is. So those keywords are set of standards and shared language. So we can easily say that a design system is a set of standards that define a shared language. But what standards needs to be defined? So those standards are basically things that designers really like and need, of course, such as typography, color palettes, iconography, spacing, layout, and libraries. So designers define these rules, and then they create the components and some documentation attached to them. So let's see an example from a real component made in Figma. As you can see, it's made of different parts, indicated by a number. We have a title, a subtitle, drag and drop box, checkbox, and 2 buttons. And the numbers that we see are inside the documentation and give us a lot of details that you don't need to read. It's just for, visual purposes. But they give us a lot of details to us developers to better define the component's characteristics. And inside the documentation, we can also have a visual representation about spacing and layout, so it's more easier to implement them. And for some components, we can also have a table with all the variants inside. In this example, we have a button with different colors, sites, and states. And you don't have to read this one, of course. So here's another question. Why are design systems helpful? They are helpful inside of the life of a product for three main reasons. The first one is scalability, because if you already have a set of pre-made components, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And they also helps you with consistency, because all the buttons, cards, and models are going to be the same through the app. And communication, because designers will need the help from the developers to know what they have to design, and vice versa. Developers will need the help from the designers to know what they have to develop. But if your product is at an early stage, or there's only one designer in your team, or you're still looking for a product market fit, probably design systems are not for you, not yet. Because if you're in this phase, your goal is to find out if the market is interested in what you do, and you had to deliver features quickly without too much overhead and structure. So we've talked about what design systems are and why they're useful. But what about developing them? So I want to share with you what happened inside our engineering team as we started to working on design systems project for our clients. So we had some issues during the process, and then we solved them by applying the design system definitions that I've said before. So a set of standards that create a shell language. But how? So this was the solution, but let's start from the beginning of our journey. So some clients start asking Belka for design systems. And then more clients ask Belka for design systems. And then more and more clients ask Belka for design systems. So by some time, the sentiment of our team was this one. So we were helping our clients to bring order in their apps, but who was helping us? Of course, the gesture, you know. So the main issue was that each one of us was making its own choices regarding how to write the code, which libraries to use, etc. So it wasn't bad, you know, because we still managed to get our job done. But there was an elephant in the room that has additional questions, like he said. And the elephant was this question. So how can we communicate, scale, and maintain consistent a project if each one of us is making up his or her own rules? So we were losing the three main useful aspects of a design system: scalability, consistency, and communication. So the answer to the question, thanks to Anas here, was to start making decisions all together as a team. So we came up with a new goal. We wanted to make the process of design system creation more straightforward. By doing what? By creating a repository ready for development, and by defining which libraries to use and how to write the code. But how to do so? Yes, another meeting, but a useful one. So we introduced this new meeting called Engineering Review inside our schedule. And the program of the meeting was to gather information about new technologies, best practices, etc., and to discuss them together. And we also defined and assigned to-dos to each other in order to solve issues that we found during the process, and also for writing the repository, of course, and the documentation. And of course, we took decisions. And this is us making important decisions with our confused manager. But what decisions did we take? I want to share with you some of them. Already discussed, already approved by our team. So we took these decisions for web-based project first, and then we assumed how they would change in a mobile environment. So some of them are different, and some of them can be used for both. But I have a disclaimer to make, of course, and these are our choices, and they work for us, but they can change according to your needs and to your projects. So, first things first, formatting, a very important and special, of course, part to configure, especially if you're working in teams. So we chose Prettier, of course, it's basically a standard for both mobile and web environments. For linting in the web, we chose Create React App for the configuration because its basic configuration can be extensible depending on our needs, and we didn't want anything too strict like Airbnb linting configuration. And for the mobile linting, we copy-pasted the default configuration that we used inside all our apps project. We know it, we found confident with it, and using it was the best decision for us. And if you are curious about it, at the end of this talk, Anas will share the repository with you with this configuration inside. So if you want, you can take a look. So we thought about scaffolding as a good base to start from and not a strict configuration like the linting one. We decided to divide folders according to their contents, and then we also thought about all possible files that a component could require. As you can see, there's a strange one, avatar.stories, but it will be a storybook file, and Anas will talk about it shortly. So, typography. It's a very important part of a design system. It will be used across all of your application, so it's very important to define its structure earlier. We thought and discussed about three main options. So the first option consists of one component with variants, and it was a no, because a complex typography file may be harder to maintain over the time, also update it's very difficult, and readability inside the component just gets worse. You are going to have like typography, it's not very readable at all. And the second option consists of creating a component for every typography style, like this one, heading 2, paragraph, etc. And it was also a no with Gordon Ramsay this time, because it increases the number of the file in the project and making it difficult, of course, to navigate. And also some styles could be repeated like over and over. And the third option consists of creating 2 or 3 main generic components with just some variants. And it was a yes, of course, because it's the option 3. And it allows a better customization. It's readable inside the components and allows you to have more control and also improves the semantic. So about the component style, the decision that we made for the web couldn't be the same for mobile. For the web, we chose Radix UI because it has a lot of primitives and controllable variables. And we chose Tailwind for the styles because we've been using it already for other web projects. For the mobile, we chose style components in order to improve the readability of the component structure and to use CSS naming convention. So in order to showcase our components, we unanimously choose Storybook. But it's not my job to talk about it. Anas is going to do that shortly. So, few meetings later, we achieved a lot of things and a lot of pasta. Of course, Italian, you know. And we made a shared repository, lot of documentation. We found out about a lot of issues during the process. Now what? Are we done? Don't think so, because I'm just talking for like 20-ish minutes. And so we created these standards, especially for the web. But as William Candillion should say, can it be done in React Native? And I let Anna's answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Fede, for the question. Hello, everyone. I'm Anas. This is my first time as a speaker, so I'm not very nervous, maybe. So, can it be done in React Native? Yes, it can. There are some differences between web and mobile, but one thing is sure, using Storybook. How many of you knows what Storybook is? Just raise your hand. Wow, a lot of you. So, for those who don't know what it is, don't worry, I'm going to introduce to you. So, imagine you're working on a project. You have to create a lot of components, a lot of UI elements that mix up the interface of your application. Sometimes this process could be challenging, as it involves constantly switching between different screens, navigating through different pages to see how each component looks and behaves. So, components introduces new challenges, such as we have an endless situation states to support, we have to handle many bugs, corner cases, and sometimes it's painful to debug. So, building components is not that easy. We need a solution. And that's where Storybook comes in. Storybook is an open source tool used for building, documenting, and testing components in isolation. By isolation, I don't mean like writing code alone in your dark room with a hoodie like Mr. Robot or something. By isolation, I mean that Storybook provides a dedicated environment where you can build and showcase components that allows developers and non-developers to view and interact with it without any need for a complete application. So, in a nutshell, think of it as a isolated library of UI components where each one can be viewed and tested without any constraint for a larger application. So, but why is so important? Well, first of all, it serves as a living documentation. It's a kind of source of truth. It improves the collaboration between the engineering and the design team. Designers can give us feedback on the implementation of the code before actually we can ship our code. It makes it much easier for new developers to jump into the project when they have such a complete overview of all the components available. So, yeah, it makes it easier for onboarding. And, yeah, saves a lot of time and effort. And obviously, we increase the chance of catching most of the edge cases. Before we getting started with the code, it's worth mentioning what we mean by story in Storybook. When it comes to creating components, often we need to consider different scenarios and variation for it, such as different sizes, different colors, different behaviors. So, this is the definition from the official documentation. A story captures the rendered state of a UI component. Developers write multiple stories per component that describe all the interesting states a component supports. So, in short, it represents an individual component and its different states or variation. So, for instance, when you create a story for a tag component, you create multiple variations for it. You could have a story for a default tag, another story for a disabled tag, yet another story with a tag with different colors, sizes, and etc. So, each story represents a different state. Simple as that. Today, we're going to build together this simple to-do app. Each of these components will be available on Storybook, but for now, we will focus on the button component. The goal is to have a quick introduction to Storybook and see together how it works. Yes, I'm a Juventus supporter. Don't worry if I go too fast or I will skip some parts. At the end of this talk, I will share with you the slides and the repository so you can try it out. First of all, we need to scaffold the project. For convenience, we're going to use the official template based on Expo. So we clone the repo using this command very quickly. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with TypeScript, so we need to install it. Yarn add TypeScript, we create our tsconfig very quickly. We're going to install also islint. We're going to add our Peter configuration, and for our convenience, we use style components for styling. Before we start to build our UI from scratch, let's take a moment to see how Storybook works in a React Native application. As opposed to other frameworks where Storybook runs on its own and it's completely separated from the application, so you have two different projects most of the time. In React Native, it's a kind of component that you can render inside your app. So because of this distinction, we need a way to switch between the app and Storybook itself. And considering we are using Expo, there is a configuration file called app.config.js where we can put some constant in there that we can use through in our app. In this file, we set the Storybook enabled constant to the value of the environment variable, in this case, Storybook enabled. In this way, using Expo constant package, we can check whether we can check the variable and can determine whether render Storybook or our app just by changing the entry point. So we render Storybook if the variable is true. Now, we can run our app just by changing the environment variable. So when running the application with Yarn iOS, you should see this on your simulator rendered on the device. And when running the application with Yarn Storybook iOS, you should see Storybook up and running. So let's get our hands dirty. This is our project structure. It's a classic Expo project. So we have our package.json, component folder, app folder, so very simple. After we clone the template, you're going to notice that we have this .storybook folder, which contains some configuration files. For the most part, we don't really have to worry about them too much, so I will skip this part. And as I said before, for the to-do app, we're going to build together this button component. So let's see the code together. We are using pressable from the core React Native elements, which we style with style components. We change also the opacity of the button based on the press and the disable state. And finally, we have a super simple function that exports some colors based on some variants. So we have the primary, the secondary, the text variant. Now, we have the button component ready. And in order to see the results, we need to define some stories. As I said before, in Storybook, stories are a representation of our different states and variations. So in order to see our button variants, we need to create a story. All component stories are defined in a story file that lives alongside the component one. So in the same directory, we create the button.stories.tsx file. The important thing is that you need to put this .stories before .tsx. And this way, it's going to tell to Storybook that this is an extra story. Now, inside of here, we need to actually set up our configuration. we need to export a default object that is going to be our story. So we need to give it a title, in this case button, and the component that it's going to render. So to this object, we can also add some arguments. And these properties are basically our props that the button can take. So we pass the button label, the variant, the disabled state, and the onPress callback. This is not required, but archetypes is used to specify the type of an argument. In this way, we can add some constraints to the values that Storybook can take. So, for instance, the variant prop can be only primary, secondary, and text. And we can switch the variants just by the radio control that we are setting up now. Now, what we need to do is to set up this function that we're going to call template, because it's the template of all our different stories that we're going to create. So this function takes some arguments that will be passed straight to the button. So the text, the variant, etc. that we see previously. Oops, I think I missed something. Since the base function now is ready, now we can create more stories. For each different variants, we just copy the template function using the bind function. I know it's not the best thing, but we need to do this. In this way, we have a brand new version of our template for the disabled state, and then we can just change the argument using this property. So in this case, we set disabled prop to true. And that's it. Now we can add all the other states we would like to show. And to see the results, we need to simply run this command. And it's gonna rendering Storybook on our app. Here we have the controls that give us a graphical UI to interact directly with the component without any need to write any code. So we can change the variants using the radio control we set previously. We can change the text value. So it gives us a prepared interface to interact with. And here we have the canvas where we can see actually the results. So the primary and disabled state. To open up our app, we can simply run this command, and it's going to render in the main app, our to-do app. So we, with the button variants, such as the primary, disabled, the text, and etc. And that's it. We saw together a quick introduction to Storybook and how it works. And yeah, it's only an introduction, so we didn't see everything. With Storybook, you can do a lot of things, such as accessibility testing. There are some add-ons, some plugins that automatically checks your component for accessibility issues. You can add Storybook as a CI step to automate some UR workflows, and maybe you can do some user interface testing. You can generate documentation from MDX files. You can mock your API data using Mirage or something, and many more. In our repository, we didn't add these features yet, but we are working on it. So in summary, design systems are a set of standards that create a shared language. It's very important to take shared decisions as a team and get feedback as soon as possible. And just use Storybook to showcase and test your components in isolation. And that's it. I'm leaving this QR code here. By using it, you will access to the GitHub repo and the slides. And thank you.